Tonight's shiur, tonight's shiur is always Lilu Nishmat Avi Mari Dober Meir Numan Alevi Imi Marati Rachel Bat Harav Michael. And tonight we are going to talk about parshat VaYigash, which is the climax, in one sense, of the Yosef and his brother story, and in another sense, it's a beginning. It's a new beginning of Am Yisrael, of the saga of the Jewish people. And we're going to, instead of focusing on the beginning of the parasha, which talks about Yehuda's plea, which ultimately leads to Yosef revealing himself and Yosef telling the brothers to come down, we are going to focus on Yaakov's actual descent to Egypt. So let's get the sources out, and away we go. So the parsha tells us that after the brothers tell Yaakov that Yosef is alive, Yaakov's response is, Vayomer Yisrael. Yisrael says, Rav od Yosef ben Ichai. Wow, it's enough that my son Yosef is still alive. Elcha ve'erenu b'terem amut. I will go and I will see him before I die. So interestingly enough, here we notice the dichotomy between, we're going to see between Yisrael, one name that is referred to, the patriarch is referred to, and Yaakov, the other name. And we're going to try to see if we can get a little bit of understanding as to what the difference is. And then immediately we're told by Yisai Yisrael v'chol hashelo, Yisrael, Yaakov, travels with all that come with him. By Yavo Be'er Shav, and he comes to Be'er Sheva. By Yizbach Tzvachim Loheav Yitzchak, and there he brings offerings to the God of his father Yitzchak. Interestingly enough, in the Parshanim, I hope we'll get to this, why it says Aviv Yitzchak only, doesn't say Avraham. Again, Parshanim, we're going to perhaps touch on that. Vayomer Elokim LiYisrael. So Hashem appears to Yisrael b'marot halayla, in a vision of the night. Vayomer, and he says to him, Yaakov, Yaakov. Now it's very interesting because it says Elokim says to Yisrael, but he says Yaakov, Yaakov. So firstly, he calls the name twice, and secondly, he uses the name Yaakov, not the name Yisrael. Vayomer Hineni, Yaakov answers, here I am. Vayomer, and Hashem tells him the following: Anochi ha'el Elohei avicha. I am the God of your father. Of Altira Merda Mitzrayima. Don't be fearful to go down to Egypt. Kilagoy Gadol Asim Chasham, because I will make you into a great nation there. Anochi, I will go Eredi Mcha Mitzrayima. I will go down with you to Egypt. Anochi Alcha Gamalo, and I will also make sure you come up. Yosef Yashit Yadal Einach, and Yosef will place his hands on your eyes. We'll see again what each of these things allude to, and because that is going to be this dialogue between Hashem and Yaakov is going to be the focus of our Torah tonight, or of what we're going to discuss tonight. Then it says again, Vayakom Yaakov mi Be'er Sheva. After having had this vision from Hashem, Yaakov gets up from Be'er Sheva. Vayis'u b'nei Yisrael, the sons of Yisrael, or the children of Yisrael, carry Yaakov Aviem et Tapam et Nisham B'agalot, their children, their wives, in the wagons that Paro sent to carry them. They take everything that they take their cattle and all their possessions. And they come to Egypt. Yaakov v'chol ito, Yaakov and all of his offspring. Who are his offspring? Banav uvnei banav ito, his sons and grandsons. Benotav uvnot banav, his daughters and his granddaughters. V'chol zaro, all of his offspring. Hevi ito mitzrayma, he brings with him to Egypt. So this is not just Yaakov going for a visit to Yosef. This is Yaakov moving the whole family down there, intended to be temporary, but it ends up being a little bit longer than expected. Interesting enough, it then lists the people who went down with Yaakov, Elishmot B'nai Yisrael. Again, I noticed the dichotomy. They're called B'nai Yisrael. These are the names of the children of Yisrael, Haboy Mitzrayma, when they come to him, but it's Yaakov Avanav. It's not Yisrael and his sons. It's Yaakov and his sons, Bechor Yaakov Ruvain. So again, we have this running, seeming dichotomy between Yisrael and Yaakov. That's what we're going to focus on, and now we're going to go to Parashim and try to understand what is this dream about, what is Yaakov afraid of, and what is happening as the family is descending to Egypt. I mean, we all know the answer to that, because we know what happens next. What happens next is basically we go to next week's parsha. Yaakov gets there. At the end of this week's parsha, Yaakov meets Yosef. They set up house in this land called Goshen, seemingly part of Egypt, but also relatively close to Canaan. Ultimately, Yaakov dies, Yosef dies, and the next thing we know, we are being enslaved by Pharaoh for a period of time, and ultimately leads to the Exodus. So we know from the rest of the Torah, we know what's going to happen. Yaakov may or may not know part of what's going to happen. So that's what we're going to find out. So Ramban begins with a very interesting question, basically addressing this question of, is it Yaakov or is it Yisrael? Which name are we supposed to be going by? So Raman says again, when Hashem calls him, he calls him Yaakov, Yaakov. After Hashem specifically told him back in parshat VaYishlach, Lo yikare shimcha od Yaakov. Your name is not going to be called any longer Yaakov, ki im Yisrael yeshmecha, but your name will be Yisrael. It seems only appropriate that when Hashem is calling Yaakov in a prophetic dream, he should call him Yisrael, not call him Yaakov, if Hashem himself has told him that's your new name. Seems very strange that here Hashem himself is calling Yaakov by his quote, old name. And similarly in the whole parsha, the name Yaakov as well as Yisrael appears multiple times. Ava, Karu Yaakov. Why does Hashem call him Yaakov? Limos, to hint at Kiata lo yasur im Elohim imanashim atuchal. Now is coming a time where Yaakov will no longer be able to struggle with God and with people and to be successful. Aval yihya beveit avadim, but he will now be in a house where he will be enslaved. Ad shialenu gamalo, until Hashem will ultimately bring him out. So Yaakov no longer Yisrael, going back to the name that Hashem gives him, Yisrael. Yisrael represents, as we saw before, in VaYishlach, Kisarisa Elohim Anashim Atuchal, that you have struggled, you have wrestled with man and with God, and you have been successful. But now is coming a time where Jacob and his descendants are not going to be able to successfully leave this bondage without Hashem's help. Because now is when the exile is beginning. With Yaakov going and leaving Canaan and going to Egypt, this is already the beginning of the Egyptian exile. And as such, the name Yisrael for the patriarch is no longer suitable. V'zahatam, however, it also says there's the reason Yisrael when they come, they are Bnei Yisrael, but it's Yaakov coming as an individual. Because they will have the name, once they arrive there, they will now become the nation Bnei Yisrael. He Yifru Habanim, because the sons will multiply, Yifru v'yirbu, v'yigdal shemam uchbodam, and they will become well known and they'll be honored. Avol Yaakov hu atab Sham, but by the individual, the patriarch himself is going down as Yaakov, not as Yisrael. He is no longer going to be the one who is going to be the prime mover in the saga of the Jewish people. Yaakov is already, as we've seen in the previous parashas, shifted from center scene. He is going down not as the main character, but now he is subsidiary almost to the nation. Rashi again asks the simple question: if God tells you not to be afraid, what does that mean? You were afraid of something. God doesn't tell us not to be afraid, just to tell us not to be afraid. So Rashi wants to know what Yaakov was afraid of that Hashem has to tell him not to be afraid to go down to Mitzrayim. Number one, he was very, very much upset that he had to leave Eretz Yisrael. That's the number one thing that's bothering him, so he's got to leave Eretz Yisrael. However, Hashem promises, by Vanochi Alcha, I will take you up, in addition to the promise that the Jewish people will ultimately be saved. Hashem promised Yaakov that he would not be buried in Egypt, that he individually would be able to be buried back in Eretz Yisrael. Again, this was a concern that Yaakov had, and we'll talk about that perhaps next week. I don't know. We may not. I don't know what we're going to talk about next week. Chizkuni. Why? Again, same question that Rashi asked. Al tira Mitzrayim. Mitzrayim. Don't be afraid to go down to Egypt. Ein omrim al tira. We don't say don't be afraid to somebody stop. El mishu mityare. Except for somebody who is very, very fearful of something. You don't say don't be afraid. Yaakov mityare the Omer. Yaakov was concerned. Rashi says he was worried that he had to leave Eretz Yisrael. The Omer, this is Chizkuni's parshat. What was Yaakov afraid of? Achshav shani yored leMitzrayim. Now that I am descending to Egypt, karvu hayamim shenemar lizakenai. The days that my grandfather Avram was told about are getting very close to the fulfillment. Gezerat shibud, which is the gezerah of the Brit Ben Abitarim, that Yadoa Tedaki Geri Yezaracha Beretz Lolahem Vavadum V'inu Otam Arba Meot Shana. This is Gezerah Shibud V'inoi Al Zar'i Be'eretz Lolahem. That my descendants, my offspring, are going to be enslaved and afflicted in a land that they do not own. They'll be strangers, and the time is coming to fulfill that promise. I see it already. Yaakov says. Amar lo HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Hashem says, Al tira mirda Mitzrayim. Don't be afraid to go down to Egypt. However, to your father, I was told him not to go to Egypt. Yitzchak was not allowed to go to Egypt when there was a famine. Avram did go. Yaakov does go. But nonetheless, I am coming to you to promise you, to give you the chizuk. Im karvu yimei hashibu v'inoi. Gam karva bracha shebirachti et ziknecha ve'eschol legoy gadol. If you are concerned, and this is what you're worried about, that means that the exile is coming closer. The days that I told Avram that his descendants are going to be enslaved for 400 years, but it also means that the bracha that comes with it, that they will become a great nation there, is also coming closer. And that's exactly what he says to Yaakov. Don't be afraid of going to Egypt, because I'll make you a great nation there. So we see Hashem is telling him that you have to understand, this is a double-edged sword, this promise. Promise comes with a 400-year exile at the beginning, but at the end, you become a great nation. So in order to become a great nation, you have to go through the exile. That is exactly why he ends with that I will make you a great nation there. So we see that the two parts of Hashem's message, not to be afraid, go together. Panim Yafot. By the way, Panim Yafot, for those of you who don't know, is also is written by Pinchas Halevi Horowitz, 18th century. Also, the person who writes the sefer called Sefer Hafla'ah. And he was a student of the third generation of Hasidic masters. And we're going to see a little bit in what he has to say here. Firstly, he focused on the fact that this is going to be Marot Halayla. Vayomer Yaakov, Yaakov Vayomer Neni. I've already written before concerning Parshat VaYishlach that when it says Lo Yikari Od Shimcha Od Yaakov, that this unlike Avraham, whose name is changed permanently, Yaakov's name is not changed fully to Yisrael, and we see this here, and we see it in many other places. I mean, for example, we don't say Elokei Avram, Elokei Yitzchak, Elokei Yisrael when we daven in the Tefillah. We say Elokei Yaakov. So clearly, Yaakov has both parts of both. But here, Panim Yafot is going to say the following. He said, "B'yodobi Eretz Yisrael hayabo koach l'shaber hasatan." When he was in Eretz Yisrael, he had the strength, with the help of being in Eretz Yisrael, that extra strength of being in Eretz Yisrael, he had the power to destroy the Satan. V'romes al zemis parshem Yisrael, and the name Yisrael hints at that. Shukamispar Yaakov v'Satan. If you take the numerical value of Yaakov, which is 182, and Satan 359, you add those two numbers together, you get to Yisrael, which is 541. Do the math. I did it. It works. So when you are Yisrael, you have the power. You overcome your own Yaakov nature, and you can control the Satan. Once you leave Eretz Yisrael to go to Chutz La'aretz, you need twice the energy, twice Yaakov, to be able to overrule the Satan. As we see, again, he quotes from the Arizal, Shnei Pamim Yaakov u'mispar has-Satan. The numerical value of Yaakov, 172 twice 384, equals the number of has-Satan, 364. 182 twice 364 is has-Satan 364. And Hashem promises that Hashem will be there to help you, because in Galut we need Hashem's help. Kshamru Chazal, Yitzro shel Adam itgaber alav b'chol yom. As the Chazal tell us, more in Kedushin tells us that a person's Yetzer Hara tries to control him every day, tries to get him to do what he's not supposed to be doing. Without Hashem's help, we wouldn't be able to overcome the Satan. So that's exactly what he's saying, that in Eretz Yisrael, you have more of Hashem's hashgacha to be able to overcome the Satan. In Chutz La'aretz, you need to work much harder at it, because in the Chutz La'aretz, you're swimming against the dominant culture, whereas in Eretz Yisrael, you're not as much swimming against the dominant culture. Again, we also have to understand here is talking about a very different time in the history of Eretz Yisrael. And the end of Hashem's message to Yaakov, Anochi al chagam alo. What does that mean? I will bring you up. Yesh lefarsh al pi ma she'amru Chazal. He's going to explain this based on the Gemara, the Chazal. Sheyiridato lemitzrayim. Here I told you we're going to get into a little bit of Chassidus here. Yiridato lemitzrayim. His descent to Egypt. Haytal lehotzi nitzotzot hakedoshot. The purpose of his exile in Egypt was to be able to find all the hidden sparks of Kedusha that are hiding in Egypt, that are buried in Egypt, in the filth, in the Avodah Zarah, in all of the immorality there. There are some sparks of holiness buried. You've got to find them and bring them out of there. Get them out of there and rescue them. The only reason the Jews end up in exile is so that Gerim, converts, can join them. These are the nitzos. These are people who are housing those sparks of awareness of Hashem, of beauty, of doing the right thing, of morality, of ethics. These people should join to Am Yisrael. I will bring you up. That you will be able, when you leave Egypt, to take all of these sparks with you. And you need, in order to be able to elevate them, you need to go down first to their level, and then you can raise them up. And according to many of the Hasidic words, that's the whole purpose of Galus anywhere. Wherever the Jews wherever the Jews are exiled out of Eretz Yisrael, it's to find all of these hidden sparks of Kedusha that have to be reunited in order to enable us to succeed in our mission as the Jewish people. Okay. Beit Halevi. Now we'll go back to a little bit more conventional stuff, I think. Beit Halevi is, of course, Rav Soloveitchik, Rav Brisk, also late 19th century, says the following. Al tira merda Mitzrayim. Don't be afraid to kill Goy Gadol. It's the pasuk Anochi al chagam alo. Yesh Lavin, wants to understand Hashem's message to Yaakov is Alcha, I will bring you up. Gamalo, I will also bring you up. So what does this double language of going up mean? What does that all mean? V'yesh Lomer. V'Yaakov Hevin. V'Yoda. D'Yiridato Mitzrayim Zuyat Chalash Galut. Yaakov was fully aware that when he was going to Egypt, this is it. This is the beginning of that Galut. Shenigzar al banav b'brit v'nebetzarim. V'yuzaron nitzrachim liyot b'Mitzrayim 400 shana b'shibud. Yaakov knew that this was the beginning of a 400-year epic in Jewish history that was going to be spent in Egypt as slaves, in being enslaved. And therefore, he was very, very concerned about what? The survival of the Jewish people, clearly. Even though Yaakov was aware of the concept that his children were going to be strangers in a strange land for 400 years, Yaakov accepted the fact that part of the Bechorah that he was buying from Esav was the fact that his descendants were going to be enslaved for 400 years. That's part parcel. Everybody knew it. Avram had told Yitzchak. Yitzchak had obviously told his sons. And they knew that this was part of the Jewish legacy, that if you want to be the chosen people, you got to go through 400 years of exile before you get there. Liot Huo, and when he bought the Bechorah from Esav, he accepted Liot Huo made Bimkomo, Shehu Yabachor, Yachol Alav, Kol, Kov Hashibud, Agalut. That he was going to be the one who was going to have to pay the entire 400-year period. In order to earn Eretz Yisrael and the blessings of Avram, and to be the one who will build the Beit HaMikdash and serve Hashem there, all of this it's a package deal. You can't get one without getting the other. So Yaakov knew that. However, what was bothering Yaakov? Yaakov figured that the Galut would be in a less hostile environment than Egypt. Why? Because Egypt is Rabat Hatumah. It was the master of impurity. Umala Gilulim, and it was full of idolatry. Achikara Hakatuv Ervat Haaretz. Until even when Yosef refers to Egypt, he's calling it Ervat Haaretz, the nakedness of the land. In other words, a land that is totally barren of morals and ethics and godliness. Now that he's finding out and realizing, hey, the exile is going to be in Egypt, he was very concerned that for 400 years is a long time. A lot of people have to pass through in generations. He was concerned that his sons would not be able to withstand the exile for 400 years and still retain their connection to godliness. And they would sink into the depths of the depravity of Egypt until they would lose their ability to ever be redeemed. That was Yaakov's number one concern. 400 years in this hellhole, they wouldn't be able to survive. And this is what Hashem said, don't be afraid to go down to Egypt. The Lashon Yira nofel al davar shu besafek. Fear means you're afraid of something. You're afraid something might happen. It's something that may or may not happen. Jews might be fine. They might be able to withstand the culture of Egypt and have no problems with it. We don't know. But what the Levi is saying that Yira, we are afraid, means that we don't know what's going to happen. We think this might happen, and we build it up inside ourselves so we get fearful, we get afraid of it. If it's something we're sure is going to happen, we don't say you're afraid. I'm worried. I know this is coming, and I want to do something to alleviate it. So the fact that Hashem uses the lashon altira Yaakov, not altida Yaakov, means that he was talking to him about something that could potentially happen, not something that was destined to happen. So therefore, he can't be talking about the exile because Yaakov already knew about the exile. It can't be possible to say that Yaakov was afraid of the exile because he knew it was going to happen. Virak al-hamakom galut. He was only concerned, Yaakov was only afraid of the place where the galut would be. Since the exile, when Hashem told Avram, he didn't tell him it's going to be in Egypt, told him it's going to be in some country. So Yaakov said, until I know where it's going to be, I wasn't thinking about it. But now, even if they were in another country, then it would still be Yirah, you'd still be afraid. When Hashem tells him, Al-Tira, don't be afraid. Anochi ereid imcha mitzrayma, v'anochi alcha gam Allah. Not only will I go down with you to Egypt, but I will bring you up. What does that mean? Based on what it was he was afraid of? How does this answer his concern about worry? Hashem promised Yaakov that he would not leave the Bnei Yisrael there to reach that level where they would be unredeemable. And therefore, if it reached that stage where the Jews were in danger of losing their identity and becoming Egyptian, God says, even if it's before the 400 years, Nigalu toch zaman. They will be redeemed immediately. At the time, they have to be redeemed to ensure that they don't lose their identity as the Jewish people. And that's exactly what happened. They were ultimately redeemed before the 400 years are over. Had they been there any longer, had the Jewish people, this is what the Medrash says, had the Jewish people stayed there another minute in Egypt, they would have been lost forever as Jews. They would have totally reached the level of Egyptians and never been able to be redeemed. Therefore, Hashem intervened, and he took them out early. Why? So that they will be able to be fully redeemed with the coming of the Mashiach, when they filled paying the rest of the 400 years. Okay, so we have to finish up the cheshbon that Hashem made with Avram because we left Egypt early, so we still owe some time. How long that is, when that'll happen, only Hashem knows. But this is what Hashem's promised, and this is why it answers Yaakov's worry. Yaakov's worry is that Bnei Yisrael will never get out. Hashem says, even if the 400 years aren't over, I'll make sure that they never get completely and totally assimilated, and I will take them out. If we look through, we will really realize that here it was the greatest promise of all the promises Hashem made. What is that? That Hashem would associate his name, Hashem's name, with the Jewish people. Very interesting concept here. What does that mean? The olam lo yifarsem shem kavodo ba'olam al yidei maaseh yotzeh chutz miderech hateva rak b'emtzot tzorach yeshuato shel Yisrael. Very interesting. He says, throughout history, the only time that Hashem will do something, even though Hashem operates all the time through derech hateva, through the natural order, he will only perform extraordinary miracles that are clearly God-given miracles only for the sake of saving the Jewish people. Yeshua Yisrael, and through Hashem doing extraordinary miracles to save the Jewish people, Yitparsem Shem Kivodo B'chol Ha'olam. His name, his honor will be publicized throughout the entire world. So it's interesting. He says that he's telling Yaakov, I am going to be associated with you. You are going to be, Bnei Yisrael and Hashem are going to be partners in to the extent that when Bnei Yisrael are saved miraculously, everybody will know it's the hand of Hashem and will see the hand of Hashem. In times in history where Bnei Yisrael are at their lowest point, so too the honor and glory of Hashem is hidden when the Jews are down. We don't see the hand of Hashem. The world doesn't see the hand of Hashem. Hashem says, I'm going to be with you in Egypt. Nobody will know I'm there. He calls as long as you are down in Egypt, so too my honor, the awareness that people have of Hashem is not visible in the world. When the Jews are being downtrodden and being oppressed, nobody sees the hand of Hashem in anything. This is what Hashem says. Hashem will go down to Egypt. Concern which we have a pasuk that says Hashem is always with us in our tzara. What does that mean? He's there. Hashem, just like we are in tzara, we are in trouble. Hashem is in trouble. However, Anochi alcha gamalo, I will raise you. When I, Hashem, raise you up, az al yidei aliyatcha, through Bnei Yisrael being raised, yitparsem gam shemni bechol hagoyim. So too, my name, Hashem says, will be publicized throughout the world, throughout the nations. Yeh aliyah lichvodiv. Anochi alcha, when I raise you up, gamalo, I too will be able to be raised up. This is also the intent of Chazal when they say, Shem partnered, joined his name to Yisrael. But not rule mashal. And in the Yerushalmi and Tanya gives the following mashal to how Hashem is connected to Am Yisrael. Al that lemafteach. Person has a key. Shechashash ba'alav shlo yenevad. You don't want to lose your keys, right? It's very important. You don't want to lose your key. What do you do to your key? The kashalo shall shell it. You tie it to a string, whatever, a chain. So too, Hashem, to make sure that the Jewish people were not lost, Shem Yaakov is the chain that holds Am Yisrael to make sure they don't get lost. The only way Hashem's name is publicized in the world is through the salvation of the Jewish people. And this is the greatest promise, greatest guarantee that Bnei Yisrael will always exist, will never be destroyed, because if we're destroyed, chas v'shalom, Hashem has no way to get the world to acknowledge him and to raise his own kiviyachol, his own standing in the world. And similar we find when the Bnei Yisrael leave Egypt, I will, Shem says to Moshe that I'm going to cause the Egyptians to chase after you, and through that, I will gain honor through Paro and Cholchelo, and all of Egypt will know that I'm Hashem. Why? Because I will save Am Yisrael. And that is how Hashem's standing in the world is raised, by saving Bnei Yisrael through miraculous means. Okay, then he goes into the whole thing about what the difference of the five makos. I'm going to skip that. We'll skip all this, but it's also interesting, but it's long, so we'll go skip through this. And we'll go to the Meshachach. Okay. Again, basically, as I said, just to summarize the Beit Levi is saying that by Hashem connecting himself to Am Yisrael, he A, ensures that Bnei Yisrael will always survive, and B, that we will always not just survive, but we will ultimately have to be saved, because that's the only way that Kadosh Baruch Hu can wake up the rest of the world to his existence, is by saving Am Yisrael. Meshech Chochmah, Meir Simcha of Devinsk, late 19th century, early 20th century. Same thing. We're talking about this appearance of Hashem to Yaakov. We never find with Avram and Yitzchak that Hashem appears to them in a marot halayla. Hashem appears to them in a dream. The only one who has dreams about Hashem, talks to Hashem in dreams, is Yaakov. Rak Yaakov kan. Uba vayetze. Twice with Yaakov. Once when he leaves to go to Lavan, and once not. Why? These two times? Hainu mipnei shayamuchan latzeit lechutza la'aretz lagur. These are the two times in Yaakov's life that he's leaving Eretz Yisrael for an extended period of time to go somewhere. And those two times, Hashem appears to him, and specifically b'marot halayla, or in a dream at night. L'chein boilav hitgalot elokit b'layla. Therefore, it comes at night, laharot, to show she'af b'layla, even at night, v'cheshkat hagalut. Night is symbolic of darkness. Darkness symbol, what is when we're distant from Hashem, in the dark, deepest darkness of galut, when it seems impossible that we will be able to have Hashem. It seems that Hashem is allowing us to be completely downtrodden. Shoresh Shechina b'Yisrael. Nonetheless, the Shechina, Hashem's presence, is always amongst Bnei Yisrael. Moshe Amru Galu leBavel Shechina imahem. Even when they were exiled to Babylonia at the end of the destruction, with the destruction of the first Beit HaMikdash, Shem went with them. Lazeh, and therefore Avram tikein tfilat shachrit, Ya Yitzchak mincha, but Yaakov is the one who is betaking tfilat arvi, the tfilah that we daven at night when it's dark. This is the Zikaron. The way we have arvit is because of the parts that were burned on this Mizbeach all night. Amru Chazal she'ein hashchina shor b'chutz la'aretz rak l'mishayah roeh be'eretz Yisrael. The only time one can be a Navi in Chutz La'aretz is if he was already a Navi in Eretz Yisrael. Sofa Avodah, the end of the day of the Karbanot, that had to take place during the day, Noegaf Balayla, can take place at night. Binaza, understand this. Why do we say in this pasuk that Hashem, when Hashem answers us in the day of Tzara, that it's Elokei Yaakov? Why not Elokei Avram, Elokei Yitzchak? Why Elokei Yaakov? Shenigla elav balayla. That Hashem appeared to Yaakov at night, as opposed to Avram and Yitzchak, to remind us that even when we are going through challenges, even when we are in Galut, even when we're in Golan, outside of Eretz Yisrael, we are still connected to Hashem, and Hashem is still connected to us. Umizeh. From this we learn. Yatzalanu Musar Haskel. We have a very important lesson. Shekasher Yisrael Ochazim et HaKabbalah HaNeuta. When we are grab on to the chain, the links that we become links in the chain, and we follow in the ways and the learnings and the teachings of our ancestors. Then I become a strong and powerful historic force who's been around forever. I am one who's been around. We are the same ones that Hashem appeared to when the Beit HaMikdash was standing. When we connect ourselves through the chains of Torah and mitzvot, then the Shekhinah and Hashem's presence can be with us even when we're outside of Eretz Yisrael. Because as he said before, the only time you can be connected to Hashem in Chutz La'aretz is if you were connected to Hashem, or your ancestors were connected to Hashem, or you are grabbing onto the teachings of those that were connected to Hashem in Eretz Yisrael. Gam Balayla, even in the darkest night of exile, we can still be connected to Hashem. Aval. But when we forget the covenant of our ancestors, and we do not follow the path of the Torah, now we're all alone. Therefore, we can have no presence Hashem. We will not be able to see Hashem's presence outside of Eretz Yisrael. And when the Shekhinah leaves them, because we are not part of this ancient nation, and therefore we are available as to be destroyed by anybody. Shekvar Ra'ah Vayidvar Hashem Elav, because he already saw this, what Yaakov is what Hashem is alluding to by seeing in this dream a vision of night. Okay, we're going to skip the rest of the Beshel Chachma, and we're going to go to the Orach Chaim. Again, we're still trying to figure out, with parshat, we're all trying to deal with what is it that Yaakov is so afraid of, and why does Hashem's message seem to answer that concern. So the Orach Chaim Kadosh is the following: why was Yaakov so concerned about going to Mitzrayim? The Mora Galut, and if he's afraid simply of Galut, how can Hashem saying don't be afraid to go to Galut help assuage his concern? If his intent is that the Galut won't be there, that Hashem can't mean that that's not where the Galut could be, because that's what actually happened. So Hashem can't be saying, okay, well, that's not where the Galut will be, because Hashem wouldn't say that to Yaakov if that's where the Galut is going to be. What is the second question Chaim asks, is all the other Parashim try to address? What does that have to do? Why does the fact that you become a great nation in any way lessen the concern that you have that this nation is going to be destroyed? It's not going to make it out of Egypt. Why ligoy gadol into a great nation? Why does he have to be there? Why not in another place? Why do they have to go through the Egyptian exile? Okay, let's go and see what the Orach Chaim HaKadosh has to say about all of these things. Okay, however, we should understand. We have to first understand that the Avot understood that there was a Gezerah, that clearly the Avot were aware of what Hashem had told Avram. Avram didn't keep this 400-year exile a secret from Yitzchak and Yaakov. It was no. Asher came, Shara Yaakov, Shever b'Mitzrayim. Therefore, when Yaakov saw that there was some food left in Egypt, Kisham Yispelu Banav Hagalut, Lezek Kishayarad Yare Linafsho, Yachil Hagalut Mimenu. What is his primary concern? His primary concern is if we're going to Egypt, and this is the beginning of the 400-year exile, means I'm also going to be enslaved. I'm going down. Now the slavery is going to begin. I'm also going to be involved in this exile. And similarly, if now we're in exile, he was also worried, I'm going to end up being buried in this unholy land. I want to be buried in Eretz Yisrael. Therefore, Hashem appeared to him and says, Anochi, okay, Avicha, I am the God of your father. What was he? Why does he connect himself to be the God of your father? Why does he say, I'm your God? Why I'm the God of your father? Just like your father never tasted the taste of slavery, the inui and affliction, you too are in the same position as your father. Al tira, don't be afraid. Hagam shatayoritzayim, even though you're going down to Egypt, which Yitzchak was not allowed to do. Well, the touch Yaakov lachzor lalot miMitzrayim kishayimtza shat kosher uachar avur shnot hara'av. Now, even though Yaakov might have thought when he was going to Egypt that he was not planning on spending there, Yaakov was not planning on spending the rest of his life there. Perhaps he was thinking, as soon as the famine's over, I'll go back home. Because again, that's what they say. They're just looking for a respite during the famine. And the promise that Hashem made, after that Hashem made to him, was don't be afraid. You're all, for the short time you're going to be there, the exile isn't going to start. But he had to finish by saying, no, the exile is going to be there. But the reason I'm sending you to Mitzrayim is because it needs to be, they need you. There's a Goy Gadol, there's a great nation in Egypt that you're going to have to rescue. Well, Haskell al Davar, now he's going to go through again, something very similar to what we always saw before. Oh, Akdim Amrei Kadosh Arashbi Anshe Sodo. This is a quote from Shimon Bar Yochai and all Kabbalistic works. Shamru Kitam HaGoliyot. What is the reason for all the galot that we go through? It is again to gather in and to select and to choose out and to find all of those hidden things of kedusha that are spread throughout the entire world, universe, probably. And in Egypt, Shamhu, and this is the capital of Tumah, Shviyat Chelkei Hakdusha Rabim Hatzumim. The captured Kedusha there is that much greater. The greater the Tumah, the greater the Kedusha that's hidden inside it. The greater the Tumah, the more Kedusha that's hidden inside. Again, the sparks of Kedusha were all scattered by the Ched of Adam Rishon. And this is the purpose of Am Yisrael in all of their Galuyot, to find these sparks and reunite them and bring them back home. will be prat begolut Mitzrayim, and specifically during the Galut of Mitzrayim. And they add another mamar, the Zohar. This is again from the Zohar. It says the following: the nation that left Egypt, the people, the 600,000 Jews that left Egypt, Ha'omed al Har Sinai, that stood before Har Sinai, they were able to capture and redeem all of these sparks that were hidden in Egypt. And that is what Moshe was referring to when he says, who is this great nation when they stand at Har Sinai? This is exactly what Hashem means when he says to Yaakov, the reason you have to be in Mitzrayim, Sivat Goy Gadol, is because this great nation, Asher Avud Sham, that are lost there in the Klipat Mitzrayim, and all of the impurity of Egypt, all of the sparks of Kedusha have to be redeemed. And you have to bring them out of there. Now, so what? Okay, so let my sons go down to Egypt and bring them out. What do I have to be there? Zulat Yeridat Yaakov. Without Yaakov himself going down to Egypt, Ein Tikva Lezeh. There was no hope that without Yaakov's great holiness, that they'd ever be able to redeem these sparks. The Yaakov himself had to go to Egypt to be able to redeem all these sparks that were so deeply embedded in the Tumah. They needed this great burst of Kedusha from Yaakov in order to be able to be redeemed. And for this we will see, Shamru Chazal, again, we have another Mamar in Bereishit Rabbah, Shalom made Yaakov Avinu, Achara Samach Ribu Yotzei Chalatzav. Yaakov did not die until he saw 600,000 descendants. V'yotam Samach Ribu Anu Sham Achar Kach, these same 600,000 were afflicted, and they became purified through this iron furnace, Bi'oni Mitzrayim, through the affliction of Egypt. That became the purifying pot to Am Yisrael. They came through completely purified. We wrote to VaYigash Yaakov, and from all of this, Yaakov understood that Yaakov should stay there, even though he would have liked to have gone back when the famine ended. And Hashem's promise that he personally didn't have to worry about being involved in the shibud. But he was still concerned after Yaakov, Hashem promised him that, he was still concerned, I don't want to be buried in Egypt. And that's why Hashem said, I will make sure you personally come back and are buried in Eretz Yisrael. Also Hashem intended why did he have to, and this is also, again, Hashem is explaining to him, through this we've explained why Hashem made the exile in Egypt, even though this would be very harsh on the Bnei Yisrael, because that's the only way these sparks that are hidden in Egypt will ever be able to be redeemed is through your holiness. So again, a very interesting perspective on the Egyptian exile and on every exile. The fact that when we go into exile, when we go out to the world, we are going out there to try to find sparks of Kedusha and elevate them and redeem them and bring them back to Hashem. Okay, final thought on this is Klei Yakar. Again, same pasuk we're working on. This whole story, how Yosef is sold, he ends up in Egypt, the brothers come down, and Yaakov ultimately comes down. Hashem's entire purpose in this whole, this whole thing is that they should go down to Egypt, because that is where they're going to have to pay this debt that they have from the time of Avram, of that they will have to be enslaved in order to become a great nation. This is what Rashi refers to when he quotes the Medrash when Yaakov sends Yosef to go find his brothers. It says he sends them from the valley of Hebron. Hebron is not a valley. Hebron's up in the mountains. If you've ever been there, you know that. But what, and Rashi quotes the Midrash, says Eitza Amuka. It was not that it's in a valley in Emek, but it was Omek, the depth. It was this depth of Jewish history was going to that originates in Hebron with Avram Avinu. Was the time came for it to be fulfilled through Yosef going to find his brothers, ultimately ending up in Egypt, and ultimately Yaakov and the whole family coming down to Egypt. Asher yotz v'asher bira lo hagoliot le'reid l'aratzot amim hamukim min eretz Canaan b'makom omek she'ol hagehinom. That the only way that was chosen among the Goliot was to go to the worst, the depth of the depths of depravity, the worst of the worst. That was what had to happen. At least that's what Hashem wants to happen. The output maybe midrash hador shel Yosef pasuk mayim. Okay, the linira lefarish. I want to explain. Shegam Yosef niskaven lezeh. Yosef also understood this. L'sabeb yirida tam leMitzrayim. He wanted them to come down to Egypt, to come to the place where there was deep water, deep impurity. And these are challenging. This was to challenge Am Yisrael. And no one can understand, why did Yosef want them all to come to Egypt? Why didn't he just go home to Canaan? However, Yehuda was the one who understood. Yehuda was able to understand perhaps a little bit, he says, about what Yosef's intent to help bring Am Yisrael down to Mitzrayim. Therefore, near Hashem el Yaakov, b'marot halayla. Well, that's why it's a night vision. Now it's interesting because we just quoted the Meshech Chochmah who said, the Orach Chaim who said that it's only the Yaakov he appears at night. That was the Meshech Chochmah. And here, Claire Carr is saying, no, that's not quite the way it is. Because Avram, we also have a dream, right? When Hashem appears to Avram at the Brit Ben B'Tarim, this whole thing we're talking about, Higer Yazaracha, Nira Elav Bizban Shashemesh Shokat, B'Tfol Tardima Ala Nashim. It was twilight, it was dusk when Hashem appears to Avram in the Brit Ben B'Tarim. The sun was setting. And Avram had a deep sleep. So this Marot Halayla, which again is the beginning of the exile, is very reminiscent of the Brit Ben B'Tarim, which Avraham had this vision as he was sleeping, again as he was falling into a deep sleep as night was falling. He calls, as we saw before, calls Eremes El Cheshchat Hagalut. All of this, why it has to be at nighttime, and Avram also is at nighttime, and it's dark, the sun is setting, is to remind us of the darkness of the exile. The Altain, therefore, Yaakov bit Yareh. Yaakov was fearful. To go to this place that was totally dark and devoid of any holiness, of any morality. Until Hashem had to say to him, don't be afraid, because this is where you'll become a great nation. How is it that they became a great nation? Al Yidei Ha'inui, through the affliction. Because Paro will say, Pen Yerbeh, I don't want them to multiply. Kadosh Baruch Hu Omer, Kain Yerbeh. So much as the Egyptians don't want them to multiply, that's how much they will multiply. So in order to become a great nation, they had to go to Egypt. And the affliction is what turned them into a Goy Gadol, a great nation. As we see, we're going to see in a couple of weeks, the more they afflicted Bnei Yisrael, the more they multiplied. So part and parcel of the population growth in Egypt was due to the fact that the Egyptians were trying to afflict them. And through this we get a clear understanding of the language that Hashem told him, that Hashem said, first, I will go down with you. I said, first, Hashem said, I will go down to Egypt with you. I'll bring you with me. I will go down. That means Hashem says, I'm going to go down before I let you go down to Egypt. When it says, it's Yaakov. So Hashem says, I'll go first and you'll follow me. When it comes to leaving, it says the exact opposite. First, I will bring you out. That means Yaakov will leave the Galut before Hashem will leave the Galut, after him. In other words, when we go into Galut, Hashem leads the way to make sure we land safely there. And when it comes back, Hashem waits till we've all left Galut to leave behind us. The Achakach Gamalohainu Aliyat Hashtina. Hamashal Bezeh. And he gives a very interesting mashal. We can compare this, Hashem going into Galut first and coming back from Galut last. We compare this to L'mishimolech et chaber l'mayim amukim. Person who's teaching his friend to swim in deep water. Chaveru yore laredet shama, and his friend is afraid of the water. Pen yitova berova mukam. He's afraid he's going to drown because the water is so deep. Al kain enu yore tochamayim achiyered shama tchila zamolicha v'acharav. So therefore, the one, his mentor, first goes in the deep water. Show him it's okay, you can survive here. And come on, join me down here. Aval ba'aliyah, when they leave the water, again, he's still afraid, even though he's now seen that he can survive in the deep water, he still can't survive alone yet in the deep water. He wants his friend to wait, make sure I get out of here. He doesn't want his friend to leave first. He'll be left alone in the deep water. So in other words, he lets the learner, the student, go first, and then the teacher, comes out. So to Hashem, when it comes to bring us into exile, to bring us into this exile, Hashem leads the way, and coming out, Hashem lets us lead the way. So that neither while you're going down or while you're coming up, he will not be alone for a single instant in the deep water. So too Hashem did not want Bnei Yisrael to be in Galut for a single second without Hashem's presence. Therefore, when it came, enter, I'll go first. And when it came up to going out, Yaakov go first, and then I'll go. That's the appropriate. However, now he gets into another way of looking at how did they enter the exile versus how did they exit the exile. Ba'aliyah, when it came out, Anochi alcha, Anochi, Hashem says, I will bring you up, Gamalo, and I then will come out also. So it seems that Shekhinah has mentioned Panim v'Achor, that Hashem goes before us and goes after us when we leave. Ki Amar v'Anochi, Hainu Hashkina, it says Anochi, I, which says Hashem, Alcha Hainu Aliyat Yaakov B'em, so Yaakov will go in the middle, Gamalo is Hashkina. So we see that Hashem not only, on the way out of exile, Hashem not only goes after them, but he also precedes them. Now, why didn't that happen? Okay? Because in Egypt, the Jews didn't hold on as strongly as they could have to their mission. Therefore, they were not worthy of Hashem being both in front of them and in back of them on the way out of Egypt. Hashem only went before him because it says Hashem traveled always in front of Am Yisrael on the way through the desert, on the way out of Egypt. Al-Kain, Masik b'Midrash, therefore the Midrash says, Hadu dichsiv, v'achaltem oto b'chipazon. We have to eat the Korban Pesach b'chipazon, in haste. This is the haste that the Shekhinah has, because the Shekhinah is getting ready to leave. Perush hadavarhu. What does that mean? The Shekhinah went when they left Egypt. Hashem went before them, didn't go after them. Therefore, they had to eat the Korban Pesach in haste, because they were following Hashem. They had to hurry up because they didn't want to lose Hashem. When you're following somebody, you want to make sure you don't get lost. If you don't know where you're going and you're following somebody, you got to make sure you hurry up to stay with him, to keep with him. That's why it says Chipazon of Shekhinah, that they had to hurry to keep up with the Shekhinah on the way out of Egypt. So wait a minute. So wait, what happened to Hashem's promise that he was going to go before us and after us? Hashem's word that he will travel before us and after us will always be fulfilled when? This promise that Hashem makes that he will lead us, come before us, and follow us, come after us, will be fulfilled in the future. We will not have to run in the chipazon to keep up with pace with Hashem. Because we will be surrounded at the ultimate redemption by the Shekhinah, both in front of us and behind us. Emotion Nemar, as the Navi in Yeshaya says concerning the Geulah, when we leave the final galut, we will not have to leave b'chipazon. And we won't have to rush to go. Because Hashem will walk before you, and He will also follow you and gather you all up. The Hainu, what does that mean? Panim ve'achor, both in front of us and in back of us. This is what Hashem promised Yaakov, that I will both lead Bnei Israel and follow them. And we hope and pray that this nevuah that the Klei Yakar is talking about, of Ki lo b'chipazon teitzer, that Yeshaya mentions, that the time will come when Hashem will lead the way and follow us, will be fulfilled soon. B'mheira v'yameinu. Thank you all. Any questions, comments, and feedback at this point in time? David, as usual, has a good question for me. Go ahead.
Sorry, I hope it's not open. Just a simple question. When Joseph confronts himself to the brother and says, Ani Yosef, yeah?
Yeah.
He then says to them something like, don't be distressed, don't worry about this, because it wasn't you, this was part of God's plan.
Right.
Don't be worried about it. That's what he says to them. So what is he saying to them? Is he saying they're not responsible for their actions?
No, I don't think that's what he's saying. I would say that he's not saying that he's not responsible for their actions. What he's saying is that I do not hold it against you because it was part of God's plan. Not that they're not responsible, because they are responsible. There are other ways that Joseph could have gotten there, that God could have gotten the Jewish people to Israel. We are ultimately responsible. In other words, he can absolve them for his own pain and suffering. He can forgive them and absolve them of the pain they caused him, but he cannot absolve them of the sin they've committed against God, if they have committed a sin against God. Okay?
Thank you. Yeah.
But he is saying that it's part of God's plan to, again, get us all to Egypt. We all have to be here, because that's part of the promise. That's part of being the Jewish people through eternity, is that we had to go through this crucible of fire in Egypt.
Got it. So he's not. I got that.
You're breaking up, David. I have to ask you to start again.
Where does the phrase Yosef Hasadik come from?
I'm sorry, Yosef what?
Joseph is known as a Sadiq. The Sadiq.
Yes.
Yeah. Where does that come from?
That comes from, at least midrashically, that appellation is given because of his ability to withstand the machinations of Potiphar's wife, and not succumb to her temptations.
Yeah, and that's midrash.
That's what the Gemara says. That's midrash Gemara. I mean that he has, he's called Yosef Hatzadik. It's somewhere in Tehillim, if I'm not mistaken, is the pasuk. Yosef, someone says, no. I'm not exactly sure where the appellation comes from, where he's called Yosef Hatzadik. But I'll have to look that one up. But again, as I said, it's based on, at least the parshat seem to say, it's based on his ability in private to be able to still withstand and say, hey, nobody will know about it. I can do whatever I want, but because God was watching, that's where he earns that appellation. That's the midrash, or the parshanut on that. I don't know whether it's a midrash, where it's located, where the source for that is, I don't know. Okay.
Many thanks.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? Okay. Have a good rest of the week, everyone. And Mr. Hashem, we'll try again next week. Take good care. Laila Tov, and Hashem should watch over everybody and all the Chayalim, especially, and all of Am Yisrael. Take good care.